Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Credit Chat Live. I'm Christina Roman, Senior Manager of Consumer Education and Advocacy at Experian, and I'm so glad you're joining us today. Today's conversation is a special one for two reasons. First, we're diving into a topic we've never covered before on Credit Chat Live, and that's the importance of 401ks and how they can help to build long-term financial security. And second, I'm excited to welcome a very special co-host. Joining me for the very first time is my Experian teammate, Jennifer White. Jennifer, I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thanks, Christina. I'm excited to be here and especially excited about today's topic. Whether you're just starting your career or you've been saving for retirement for years, there's something everyone can learn from today's discussion.
Absolutely. And we honestly could not have asked for a better guest. Today, we're joined by Julie Jason, who has directed Jackson Grant's investment counsel practice for more than 30 years. Julie began her Wall Street career as both a securities lawyer and portfolio manager, giving her a unique perspective on investing, financial planning, and wealth management. Her legal background has helped clients integrate investment strategies with estate and tax planning, while her experience as a FINRA mediator and arbitrator has helped families navigate complex financial decisions. Julie has also served on the IRS Taxpayer Advocacy Panel representing the state of Connecticut and was recognized with President Obama's Call to Service Award for her volunteer work. In addition to her work as an investment advisor, Julie is an award-winning financial journalist and author whose books and columns focus on financial literacy and investor protection. We're also excited to time today's conversation with Jackson Grant's 401k Champion Award, a national essay competition that invites participants to share how workplace retirement plans have helped shape their financial futures. And we'll learn more about that initiative during today's discussion. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to be talking to you about 401ks because this is a favorite topic of mine as a proponent of financial literacy education. And do you mind if I tell you the story about how I got involved?
Oh, no, I would love for you to share that, please.
All right. So years ago, I had a client who was an attorney working for a company that had a very good match on his 401k plan. It was a dollar for dollar match. And I talked to him about his participation in the plan, and he told me that he wasn't participating. And when I pursued that, he really hadn't thought about how important the match was to his future. And he hadn't thought about the fact that, you know what, it's impossible to double your money overnight with an investment, but it is possible to do that in a 401k that has a dollar for dollar match. So I went to the local bookstore to get him a book on 401ks. And I couldn't find one. So you can tell how long this was. This was in the 90s. And so I thought about it and I wrote a book called You and Your 401k that talked to someone who wasn't understanding the power of the 401k. And what the book did at that point in time was to look at a 401k as in a different way, not as a passive benefit plan, but as an investment alternative like no other. So that was the introduction. That was why I became so excited about being able to get the message out to people who just weren't looking at things that way. And then after the first book, You and Your 401k, I wrote another book for 401k plan sponsors that kind of broke apart different things that a company needed to know in order to offer a 401k that could be very valuable to the employee. And obviously, a lot has happened since then. But there's one thing that I think has not happened, and that is, as a long-term proponent of financial literacy education, I am still not seeing the robust type of education that I would like to see. And what am I talking about? There are people who are eligible for 401k plans that are not participating, but they don't know how to do that in a way that is affordable. And so I can talk to you about that. Let me just give you one example on that right now. So let's say somebody has a 401k plan that they're not participating in, and let's use the dollar for dollar match situation. And the beginning of the next year, he gets a tax refund. So when you put that together, those three elements together, you have an individual who doesn't understand that dollar amount that he's sending to the federal treasury is a loan to the government. And he really should think about that loan to the government as money that can fund his 401k, in some cases without reducing his paycheck.
Mhm.
So that all happens through W-4 management. And the Form W-4 is the one that tells payroll how much money to withhold from your paycheck. So that's just a huge discussion point that needs to be had with individuals who are not participating in their 401ks. But the other discussion point that I don't see as done as strongly as I would like to see is the role of mentorship. And let me just throw in the 401k champion here for a minute. So, when I started the contest for 401k participants to tell us what they loved about their 401ks, what we found is a number of people said that they learned about 401ks through a mentor. Who was the mentor? It could have been a family member or it could have been somebody at work. And what that opened up for me was the idea of wait a second, let's have a dialogue with participants engaged with other participants. In other words, let's meet in the lunchroom. Let's have an open dialogue with people about how to use the 401k, how successful individuals figured out how to use the 401k effectively. And that's the whole story behind the 401k champion competition, to engage, to allow people to engage in a story that tells why and how they love their 401k, what it's done for them, how it's leading to retirement security. So, okay, that's the long side of the story.
I love that. And I can relate to so many points in what you shared. First, just not really understanding the benefit of a match or why saving money in that 401k is so important. I know the pre tax benefits of having that 401k plan along with having that match all the way up until I was 30. I only worked for smaller companies that didn't really offer great 401k programs. It wasn't until I started working at Experian that I started working for a company that really educated us on their 401k plan. They offered that match, and I started to, that light bulb went on. I was like, oh my gosh, okay. So now I really, first of all, I felt behind the ball on my savings for retirement. But just knowing that I had that match, I absolutely had to save up to that match and then more just to try to catch up. But I could so relate to that story about just not understanding how that works. And then also, what I really love about this competition is that peer to peer kind of mentoring, because I feel like you find out so many things just from having these conversations with your coworkers. I learned about 401ks, I learned about HSAs from other coworkers participating in the program and other benefits that are available that maybe you don't realize are there or have not taken advantage of. And you learn so much from conversations with your coworkers. So I love that this competition really encourages that. And at least it gets people wanting to explore their 401k plans with their own employers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do believe that if you think about how 401k education is usually handled in a company, it's handled typically by the vendor of the 401k plan who comes in and makes presentations, enrollment presentations, et cetera, which are great presentations and they're very, very valuable. But if I'm sitting in that room listening, it's not really kind of feels like a test, classroom. Maybe I'm gonna be taking an exam. It's not as friendly as a one-on-one conversation with a coworker. It just puts everything in a different place in your psyche. That's another thing that I think is very, very, very valuable. And I'm so pleased that we came up with this idea. This basically, a number of us at the company were brainstorming about how do we reach the participant in a way that can be impactful. And it just came up in a brainstorming session that we should try this. So it was no participant award program nationwide. So this is the one and only nationwide participant only award system. And yes, you do get the title of 401k champion. 3 people win every year. And you also get a check for $1,000 each. And then you also get a trophy too. So, and then people can, who see the trophy at work, they can come up and say, what did you do? How did you do this? And again, it's just a friendly sort of way to talk about something that may be confusing, maybe daunting, maybe people who are not participating feel that they don't know what questions to ask, they don't know who to ask. So again, we've been very excited about this. And one other thing that I'd like to mention is because we do this on a pro bono basis, this is one of our pro bono missions for our firm to do financial literacy education. we cover all the funding for it, and we're happy to do it. But I'd love to see this continue and to grow. And if people would just spread the word about it, it would just be wonderful. In other words, we'd like to continue on a year by year basis for as long as possible. So the more people who know about it, the better.
Absolutely. Julie, can we play a little bit of, or maybe we can do a little bit of role play as peer to peer mentors? Because I know we've said things like matching, and I mentioned pre tax. Somebody that's new in their career, maybe they're fresh, or maybe they're even job hunting right now, and they're looking for benefits offered by different companies. What advice would you give them about understanding 401k options? Or what is something that you hope that they understand, or what terminology can make it a little bit more clear when they're looking at different options?
That's an interesting question. It's a very difficult question to answer, but I can tell you that it depends on the company. So when you're comparing different offers and different types of 401k plans, that's where it gets a little more complicated for us to talk about. That I'd be happy to talk about that in another session. But for us to talk about right now, I think if you're not participating in your 401k plan right now, the most important thing to find out about is, how does the company contribution work if there is one? So you could have a match of a number of different kinds of matches. So we talked about a dollar for dollar match. It could be a 50 cents per dollar match. It could be something different. And then it could be tiered. So you could have X percent up to a certain dollar amount or percentage. And that's where you see a little bit more complication happening in terms of decision making. But I can reverse it. If you reverse engineer everything about a 401k plan, what you need to understand is this is the answer for retirement security. So the question you need to ask upfront is, how do I maximize it? What do I need to do to maximize the company contribution? And if you start there and then work backwards, then you'll also see whether you can afford it. And then that takes you to W-4 management. So in its very simplest terms, start with the end in mind. Start with, how do I maximize the money that the company wants to give me? And if you sit down with your HR person, that he or she will help you do that, and then work backwards from there. And different plans have different schedules. But again, think of it in terms of, my company wants to give me money to save for retirement. How do I optimize that money?
Yeah, so many people say, I'd love to save more, but I just can't afford it right now. What would you say to someone who can only put away a small amount from each paycheck?
So it's a funny sort of thing. So if you do not participate at all because you can't afford it, you already know that I'm going to say, well, wait a minute, you probably can. I mean, just see if you get a tax refund. That's the starting point. And when I say you probably can't, what I mean is you may be able to afford it without lowering your paycheck, either at all or just a little bit. So that's vital. You have to understand how to do that. But the other thing that one has to remember is that this point in time, today, will determine your future. What you do today determines what will happen when you retire. And if you look at studies of people who are retired and you ask them, what do you regret? Well, one of the biggest regrets is not starting to save early enough. Well, you know what? We don't have to do that. Start today. No matter what you're doing, no matter what the dollar amount is, you're creating a habit. And that creation of a habit is the gold that you have. And if you could do it through a 401k plan, it's so easy to do through a 401k plan. You don't have to think about anything other than enrollment. In other words, you don't have to say to yourself, okay, this month I'm spending X on this and X and Y on this, and oh yeah, and what's left over I'll put into savings. No, you don't have to think about that because it's coming directly out of your paycheck. So it's super easy to do. But I think the most important thing that I can say, given my experience and given the decades of working with individuals, is form the habit. Form the habit now. And that habit will become part of you, how you define yourself. And I'd rather see everyone in the audience who's listening right now defining themselves as secure retirees. In other words, you're a future retiree. Today, you're a future retiree. Do what you need to do today. Don't wait till tomorrow, because that moment will have passed. And you know what? You're done listening to this podcast and you're on to something else. And you're going to forget to go back to the podcast. You're going to forget to do what's necessary today. So I say, act now, even if it's tiny, get going. Don't even think about it. Just get going.
Love that point about getting started early. I hear people say often that when who are just starting out, that retirement just feels so far away to them that it's easy to put off. How would you help people shift that mindset to get away from viewing it as something that is a later problem?
Well, again, that's an excellent question. And I do think that it has to do with how you define yourself. In other words, if you define yourself in terms of someone making decisions for you or waiting until something happens to you before you take action, that's not the best. What's better is for you to find the goal that you want. And again, I come back to my point that it's the best time to do that is now. And I do believe that it also is a very much tied to habit formation. So even if you think, I'll wait for what? What are you waiting for? To take advantage of compounding, you need to start today. And maybe that's the trigger. If they don't understand the concept of compounding, they may think, okay, I can wait. But no, you cannot wait. And the reason is that the longer period of time that you have between now and when you need the money, the more your money can grow. And it can grow substantially given time. And one of the things that my firm does is we put out market research just for our own clients. And what we find in looking at market research is that the if you just look at the S&P 500 for a minute and you look at large cap markets going back to the 20s, let's say, you just have to be in the game for a long time because every single year there are market movements that are intra-year declines. There's a declining market that occurs within every single year. And some people wait until they think that the market's only going up, but you know what? That doesn't happen. That's not reality. So it's a constantly moving exercise. And when you start early and you gain experience, then you gain confidence. If you wait until you're 65 to start saving, you're not going to be able to actually effectively make it because you lost all the opportunity for compounding from today through the time that you retire. So the formula just doesn't work unless you put in the time.
I think there's often a lot of fear in the news about the stock market ups and downs. And so people think like, well, forget it. YOLO, I'm not going to put my money in retirement. I'm going to invest in its experiences and things in the now and be really present now because who knows what's going to happen with a market. What advice would you give somebody to help them stay focused on the long-term goals and not let the short-term market swings kind of derail their savings plan?
All right, this is really, really easy. What you do is you come up with a list of goals. So you have some short-term goals and you have long-term goals at the same time. You don't replace one with the other. So it's kind of like I guess, like layers of a cake. When you're looking at a layered cake, you don't have to squash the cake into one layer to enjoy the cake. You eat the cake, even though it's got layers. Well, okay, so you have short-term decisions. Let's say you want to trade. That's a short-term decision. That's a short-term measurement. You have to pay attention daily. Retirement saving, you always need to have that layer in that cake. Always, always, always. Never get off of there. Never drop that objective because when you drop the objective, you lose in a whole bunch of different ways, but definitely with the concept of compounding. So when you have a fear of losing money, it's because you have not experienced how the markets work. And here's the thing about the experience. You can't have experience from time to time. In other words, it doesn't work to have experience in today's market, but not have experience in tomorrow's market. You need knowledge and you need to gather that knowledge by experiencing the markets. Now, what happens over time is that you learn from trial and error. If you remove yourself because you're afraid, your trial stops. And if you remove yourself and you don't see what worked and what didn't work, so now I'm talking about the error part of the equation, you're not learning. And if you wind up in a position where you've never made investment decisions, you wind up, take someone who is going through a divorce, and let's say it's a couple, and let's say the husband is the breadwinner and the wife is the caretaker, the homemaker, et cetera. And let's say that the caretaker homemaker is just plain not interested in things financial. So she delegates everything to the husband. Well, for that person to start trial and error at some later point in life, let's say that person is 50 at that point in time, that's hard. It's hard to do. It's hard
Mhm.
to catch up. So the trial and error experience has to start very early. And that's why I love the 401k, because when you start your first job, you get into the 401k, you're getting your experience, and that makes you a sound and good investor if you focus. You have to learn, you have to watch, you have to learn in order to be that kind of investor where you're not afraid. And being afraid, to me, it goes back to experience. It's a lack of experience, a lack of understanding just how the markets work. And one of the things that I'm a big fan of is financial literacy education, not just in pro bono work that we do, not just in the writing of the books, not just in the giving of the speeches, not just in the column, and not just in the 401k Champion Award, but also every time we meet with any one of our clients, we're there to help provide information in a different way that kind of sets the tone for not only the person, but for the family, the extended family, so that they're all learning as the markets evolve. See, you can't really learn everything you want to learn from a book. And you can't learn it on one day. You have to kind of go through the daily action. I mean, I say daily, it doesn't have to be daily, weekly, monthly, or whatever the periods are, but it's an ongoing travel through time that makes you a good investor.
You shared so many great nuggets, Julie. And I love that last point about working with somebody and getting financial education from somebody, because I feel like your finances are so personal, they're so nuanced. And so what you read from a book doesn't always just apply to you. So having somebody that knows your spending, that knows your habits and your patterns, and can help to finances in a way that not just educate you, but educate the family is really important. And I just love that. I love that you mentioned that.
It's almost imperative that happen. And here's the reason why. So it used to be that people were not living as long as they are now. It used to be that people who worked had pensions. The pensions would last a lifetime. That's not the case anymore. Very few people have pensions that cover their expenses. So what happened as the 401k evolved and started to replace pensions is it put the burden on the individual employee to learn enough to create a stream of income for himself for retirement, which now could last 30 years or longer. Life is so different today than it was 30 years ago in terms of the need for the individual to learn. And you mentioned emotion before, not to be afraid, to be able to just, as a habit, face it, but not just for yourself, because children, grandchildren, family members, the lawyers and the accountants working with you, they really need to be part of the equation, because it's not just the investment side of it, it's taxes too, and estate planning too. These are vital pieces of today's life that really weren't quite as important in prior times. And even someone who is not a mega millionaire needs that basic information. And there's one other thing, one very important thing. When I talk to people who are just not interested in investing, one of the things that I ask them is, if you had a child, a 5-year-old child, don't you, when you walk to the street, up to the curb of the street, don't you tell that child, look to the left, see if any cars are coming, look to the right, see if any cars are coming before you cross the street? And the answer is yes, of course. Well, you have to do that for yourself. You have to
Mm.
look to the left and look to the right and don't get hit by a car. So it's the same sort of thing. It's just understanding very basic rules that you need to know to just go through life in today's much more complicated life than, like I said, even 20 or 30 years ago.
Absolutely. What I love about having this conversation also, you mentioned earlier that some people, well, first of all, investing in your 401k, it helps you to build confidence as an investor, right? I always told my boss Rod, he just retired from Experian, like, well, I'm not super confident in investing. I don't really know how investing works. And he would tell me, "Do you invest in your 401k?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I do. I have that per paycheck amount that goes in." And he said, "Then you're an investor because you're investing in your future. You're investing in your 401k." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't really think about it that way because I don't think about it ever." And that was another point that you made earlier about how easy it can be because you just set it up and then you forget it. You just let it ride, and you don't realize that it's coming out of your paycheck each week because you don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to go in and actively put that percentage in the account. It just automatically comes out. So anybody that's listening right now, pause and go and look at your employer program. And if you're not investing in it, go and do it. Go and get started. Look at what the options are. Look at that match. And it's one of the easiest ways that you can at least just get started investing in your future.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good advice.
All right. Well, I think you've shared so many amazing nuggets, Julie, with our listeners, at least just to get the palate wet on learning about their company's 401ks, about being a peer to peer mentor. And I think that's so important. And I would just love for you just to kind of wrap it up by sharing a little bit about what you're hoping that our listeners will do once they listen to this episode, and then also how they can get involved in that 401k champion challenge.
Yes. So this is the important wrap up. So there are a couple things. Number one is it's easy once you get it started. It will take a little time to do some learning, but here is where the champion competition may be helpful. So anyone in the listening audience who loves his 401k, tell us your story. We've made it extremely easy to do that. There's an application on the website. The website is 401kchampion.com, 401kchampion.com. And really, really simple application that basically just says, okay, tell us about your experience with your 401k. And that application then goes to a panel of independent judges on an anonymous basis. So no matter who you are, who you work for, it's anonymized. And then the judges pick 3 winners who, again, will be named champions for the year and who will receive a $1,000 check each. And also, yes, there is a trophy too. So that's just for fun. And I think that if the more people that participate, the more we can get the word out about how important it is for employees to have a dialogue and and those that figured out exactly how to make it work for them, they can have a dialogue. They can encourage people to spend some time with learning about their 401ks. And it's a very positive result. So hopefully we'll get applications, and hopefully through this process, you'll be thinking about, those of you who don't participate in your 401k, will think about learning about the 401k.
Wonderful. And again, anybody can join this, no matter where they're located.
That's correct. It's a national contest, and it's only for 401k plans.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Julie. Jennifer, is there anything else you wanted to add in or ask?
No, I just think that this was a great conversation because a lot of people, they don't know where to start. They don't think they can start. Like to your point, they can take advantage of employer matching and not even in some cases reduce their paycheck, or if they do, it's a negligible amount. And I don't think that a lot of people realize that. And I don't think a lot of people have the mind frame that you were talking about, where we are all future retirees. And that's so important. The younger that you start, the better, and just to reach people and get them started thinking about it and why it's so important and how easy it can be. Also, just that I think that, the habit is half the battle, forming the habit and just building that consistency, starting somewhere. And then you can always increase contributions as income grows. You can always, do more as you can, but just getting started. So I really appreciate the things that you said about how to look at it as we are all future retirees and why it's so important to start now.
Thank you for that. That's a great summary. So yes.
Thank you, Julie.
Wonderful. Julie, well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and practical advice with us today. Retirement can feel overwhelming, but you've shown us that taking even small steps today can make a meaningful difference in our financial future. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this edition of Credit Chat Live. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, please share a like, comment, share it with your friends, family, coworkers, anyone who would benefit from learning about 401ks and planning for retirement. And please be sure to check out that 401k Champion Award to learn more about the essay competition and how workplace retirement plans are making a difference in people's lives. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Credit Chat Live.